I'm done. Get out of my way.
No, listen to me.
I'm not listening to anything. Just disappear. I told you to stay out of it. You just couldn't help yourself, could you?
You're making a mistake.
No. You are. I demand to speak to your supervisor right now. This is unacceptable.
Sir, please calm down. We're doing everything we can, sir.
Boots, get out of that seat now, before I call security and make this very embarrassing for you. Those were the first words, Doctor. Boots. Amara Whitfield heard when she looked up from her book. Not a request, not even a question. A command delivered by a man in a $5,000 jacket, who had decided in the span of 8 seconds that she did not belong in the room she was sitting in. Boots. She did not flinch, she did not close her book. She simply turned the page. That single, quiet gesture would end up costing him everything he owned. Boots. The Meridian Club Lounge at Ashford County Regional Airport, just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, was the kind of place built to make people forget they were still on the ground. Boots. 16-foot windows looked out over a runway shimmering with heat. The carpet was the color of wet slate, thick enough to swallow footsteps. Boots. Somewhere behind a mahogany bar, an espresso machine hissed softly, and the whole room smelled like cedar and old money. Boots. Amara sat in a corner armchair near the window, a paperback copy of Beloved resting on her knee, a cooling cup of chamomile tea beside her untouched. Boots. She wore dark jeans, a plain gray cardigan, and scuffed brown loafers that had walked through 3 continents. No jewelry except a thin gold band on her right hand, her mother's ring. Boots. No logo, no entourage. Nothing to announce that the woman, reading quietly in the corner, was in fact the founder and chief executive officer of Solis Air Systems, the avionics and flight safety software company whose code was running, at that very moment, inside 11,000 aircraft across 4 continents. Boots. She was flying under her mother's maiden name, A. Reyes, the way she always did when she wanted to see her own company, the way a stranger would see it. Boots. Twice a year, without warning her staff, Dr. Whitfield disappeared into her own airline as an anonymous passenger. She called it the mirror test. Boots. Today's flight was headed to Denver, where her father, 71 years old and 3 weeks into hospice care, was waiting for her. Boots. She had told no one at Solis where she was going. She had told no one that her father was dying. Boots. Grief, she had learned a long time ago, was easier to carry quietly. 40 minutes into her wait, the lounge doors opened and the air changed. Boots. Preston Calloway arrived first, already talking, loud fast, performing a phone call for an audience that hadn't asked to watch. Boots. His navy suit jacket had been tailored to fit him 2 sizes ago. It strained now across shoulders that had softened years past his glory days as a regional sales director turned self-appointed brand consultant. Boots. His watch, a chunk of gold the size of a bottle cap, caught the light every time he gestured, which was often. Boots. Behind him, Vanessa Calloway swept in, trailing a rolling suitcase covered in interlocking designer logos, her sunglasses pushed up into hair, so tightly styled it looked bulletproof. Boots. She surveyed the lounge with the particular disgust of a woman who had expected marble and found only very expensive carpet. Boots. This is it, she said, not quietly. This is the exclusive lounge. I've seen nicer waiting rooms at urgent care. Boots. A gate attendant nearby, 24 years old, new to the job, visibly flinched. Boots. Preston ended his call with a booming, "Just get it signed. I don't care what the lawyers say. Tell them Calloway wants it done by Friday." A sentence designed entirely to be overheard, and clapped his hands together like he'd just closed a stadium deal instead of hung up on his brother-in-law about a storage unit dispute. Boots. "Babe," he said, scanning the room the way a man scans a restaurant he's about to complain in, "find us the good seats." Boots. "We've got the Aspen thing tonight. I need to look rested for the cameras." His eyes swept past the window seats, past 2 empty leather chairs by the bar, and landed, inexplicably, deliberately, on the corner where Amara sat. Boots. "There," he said, "by the window. Best light." There was only one problem. Amara was already sitting there. Preston walked over anyway, positioning himself directly in front of her chair, close enough that his shadow fell across her book. Boots. "Excuse me," he said in the tone of a man who did not actually intend to excuse himself for anything. Boots. "This is our seat." Amara looked up. Her expression did not change. "I don't believe it has your name on it," she said evenly, and returned to her page. Boots. A ripple of stifled laughter moved through the lounge. Quiet, quickly swallowed, but real. Preston's jaw tightened. Vanessa's mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Boots. Cute, Preston said. Real cute. Look, I don't know what kind of ticket you're flying on, but we've got status. Boots. Priority. You understand what that means? I understand exactly what it means, Amara said, still reading. It means you paid an airline extra money. Boots. It doesn't transfer ownership of furniture. The laughter this time was less stifled. Somewhere near the bar, a man in a Carolina Panthers polo shirt made no effort to hide his grin behind his coffee cup. Boots. Preston's face reddened at the edges, that particular shade men get when they realize a room is not on their side and have decided to double down instead of retreat. Boots. Get up, he said, the volume climbing now, no longer performing for a phone call but performing for the room itself. Boots. Before I call security and make this very embarrassing for you. Amara closed her book, slowly, deliberately, marking her page with a worn receipt she kept as a bookmark, and set it on the small table beside her tea. Boots. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not stand. You're welcome to call whoever you like, she said. Boots. I'll be right here. If you think that was the worst moment of the next 90 minutes, you have never met people like Preston and Vanessa Calloway. Boots. What happened next would turn a private airport lounge into a courtroom with no judge, and Preston Calloway would spend every single minute of it, convinced he was the one being wronged. Boots. Vanessa arrived at her husband's side like reinforcements. She looked Amara over. The cardigan, the loafers, the plain gold ring, with the particular efficiency of a woman pricing another woman's worth in 11 seconds flat. Boots. Oh my God, Preston, just leave it, she said, loud enough to be heard 3 seating clusters away. She probably got her seat with airline miles from some rewards card. Boots. It's fine. We'll just find somewhere else. I'm sure there's a spot for people like her, by the vending machines. Boots. The words landed exactly where they were aimed. A few feet away, an older black gentleman in a Navy veteran's cap lowered his newspaper an inch, his eyes flicking toward Amara, with something between concern and recognition. He understood, immediately, what had just been said and what it meant, though no one had used the word out loud. Boots. Amara did not look at Vanessa. She looked at her tea, now fully cold, and set it aside. I have a confirmed seat, she said, calm as still water. Boots. I checked in at 6:40 this morning. I have a boarding pass. I've done nothing except sit in a chair and read a book. Boots. If that's a problem for either of you, that's not something I'm able to fix. It's a problem, Preston snapped, when I have somewhere to be and some. He stopped himself half a beat too late, the unfinished word hanging in the air like smoke. Some random passenger is holding up my afternoon. Boots. The veteran folded his newspaper fully now and set it in his lap, watching. A gate agent, Lindsay, according to the name tag pinned crookedly to her blazer. Approached at a fast, nervous walk, clearly having been summoned by someone at the front desk who'd overheard the commotion. Boots. She was maybe 26, knew enough to still believe every conflict had a clean solution if you just found the right form to fill out. Boots. Sir, ma'am, is everything all right over here? No, everything is not all right, Preston said, rounding on her with visible relief at having a new target. Boots. This woman is refusing to give up a seat that belongs to my family. Do you know who I am? Boots. I'm a platinum-tier client of this airline. I fly this route every single month. Lindsay's eyes darted toward Amara, plain cardigan paperback novel, a stillness that read, to an untrained eye, as passivity rather than power, and made the same fatal miscalculation Preston and Vanessa had made 90 seconds earlier. Boots. Ma'am, Lindsay said, turning to Amara with an apologetic wince. Would you mind terribly moving to one of the other seating areas? Boots. Just to help things go smoothly. There is no rule requiring me to give up a seat I'm legally occupying because another passenger prefers it, Amara said. Boots. Her voice had not risen one register since Preston first stood over her. That, more than anything, was what unsettled the people watching. Boots. If Mr. She glanced at his boarding pass, visible in his jacket pocket. Calloway would like a seat by the window. There are 2 open ones at the bar with an excellent view of the runway. Boots. I don't want a seat at the bar, Preston said. I want that seat. I want you to get up. Boots. No, Amara said, one word. No inflection, no drama. It landed in the lounge like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples took a long moment to settle. Boots. Preston Calloway had built an entire career, such as it was, on being the loudest voice in any room he entered. Boots. He had never, not once in 44 years, been told no by someone who did not immediately flinch afterward. The refusal seemed to physically confuse him, like a door he'd pushed his whole life had suddenly turned out to be locked. Boots. You know what? He said, jabbing a finger toward her, his voice climbing into a register the whole lounge could now hear clearly. People like you always think you can just sit there and act like you own the place. Boots. You don't, you never will. Now get up. The word people like you did not need decoding. Nobody in that lounge needed it explained. Boots. The veteran in the navy cap set his newspaper down entirely now, his hands flat on his knees, his body angled forward, not moving yet, but ready to. Boots. Amara looked at Preston for the first time with something other than mild disinterest. It wasn't anger. It was closer to recognition, the specific, weary recognition of a woman who had heard some version of that sentence her entire professional life, in boardrooms with better lighting and worse manners. Boots. I'm going to say this once, she said, so that everyone in this lounge understands exactly what's happening. I purchased a ticket. Boots. I checked in on time. I am sitting a seat I am legally entitled to occupy. You are upset because a stranger did not immediately surrender something to you the moment you asked. Boots. That is not my problem to solve. It's yours. Somewhere behind the bar, a second employee, older, gray-haired, a supervisor badge clipped to her vest, had gone very still, phone already halfway to her ear. Boots. Nobody in the Meridian Club lounge that afternoon had any idea that the woman with the paperback novel and the cold tea had, 4 years earlier, personally rewritten the emergency landing protocol used by 17 major airlines. Boots. Nobody knew that the software keeping half the planes on that runway in the air was hers. Nobody knew that the man screaming at her to get up owed his very ability to fly safely to code she had personally reviewed line by line. Boots. They were about to find out. And what happened in the next 40 minutes would not just humiliate Preston Calloway. It would follow him, quietly and permanently, into every job application he would ever fill out for the rest of his life. Boots. 20 minutes passed with no resolution, only escalation. Boots. Lindsay had retreated to the front desk, visibly shaken, and returned with the lounge's floor supervisor, a stocky man named Gary Pruitt, mid-50s, tie slightly loosened, the exhausted energy of someone who had diffused 100 arguments exactly like this one by giving in every single time. Boots. Folks, Gary said, hands raised in a gesture meant to project calm and instead projecting panic. Let's everybody take a breath here. Boots. Mr. Calloway, I understand you're frustrated. Frustrated doesn't begin to cover it, Preston cut in. I've been humiliated in front of this entire lounge by someone who clearly doesn't understand how a private terminal works. Boots. Gary turned to Amara with the practiced apologetic softness of a man, about to ask someone to absorb an inconvenience, so a louder person could feel comfortable. Boots. Ma'am, I know this isn't fair, but would you be willing to just, for the sake of everybody's afternoon, move over to the far seating area? Boots. We can even comp you a coffee for the trouble. Amara set her hands flat on the arms of her chair. Boots. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The entire lounge had gone quiet enough that a whisper would have carried. Boots. Let me ask you something, Gary, she said, reading his name tag with the same deliberate precision she'd used on Lindsay's. Boots. In the time I have been sitting in this chair, has this man threatened me? Has his wife made a comment about my income based on my clothing? Boots. And now you are asking me, the person who has done nothing, to move, so that the person who has been shouting in a public lounge for 20 minutes can feel rewarded for it. Boots. Is that the policy here? Reward the loudest voice? Gary opened his mouth and found for a long, uncomfortable second that he had no answer that didn't sound exactly as bad as it was. Boots. It's not about reward, he tried. It's about keeping the peace. The peace was fine, Amara said, until he decided my chair belonged to him. Boots. Preston, sensing the room shifting further away from him, and unable to process it as anything other than injustice, made the decision that would end his career before the sun set that day. Boots. You know what, he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into something uglier, quieter, meant only for her, but pitched exactly loud enough for everyone to hear. I've dealt with people like you before. Boots. You think because some HR policy protects you now, you can just disrespect people who actually built something. I have a business. Boots. I have a legacy. What do you have? A library card and an attitude. The lounge went utterly silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its hiss. Boots. The veteran in the navy cap stood up. He didn't say anything yet. He simply stood, arms crossed, positioned a few feet from Amara's chair like a man taking up a post he'd occupied before, in places far more dangerous than an airport lounge. Boots. Vanessa, emboldened by her husband's cruelty rather than embarrassed by it, added her own contribution. Honestly, she said to no one in particular, loud enough for the whole room, I don't even understand why security hasn't removed her yet. Boots. This is exactly why places like this need better screening for who gets let in. The word screening did the same silent, ugly work people like you had done 10 minutes earlier. Boots. Gary Pruitt's face went pale. Lindsay, still hovering nearby, pressed a hand over her mouth. Amara reached, finally, into the leather tote at her feet. Boots. Not for an ID. Not for a boarding pass. She pulled out her phone. Preston laughed, an ugly, triumphant bark. Boots. Oh, what? You're gonna call your lawyer? Post us online? Go ahead. Nobody's gonna care. I'm not calling a lawyer, Amara said, her thumb already moving across the screen, scrolling past names that included 2 state governors, the CEO of a competing airline, and the head of the FAA's Southeast Regional Office, until she found the one she needed. Boots. I'm calling my chief operating officer. She pressed the call button. It picked up on the first ring. Dr. Whitfield? Boots. The voice on the other end was sharp, immediately alert. Everything okay? I thought you were off the grid until… Boots. Change of plans, Marcus, Amara said, her voice utterly level, her eyes never leaving Preston Calloway's reddening face. I need you to do 3 things for me right now. Boots. First, I want a full operational hold on every Solace Air Systems flight, routing through Ashford County Regional, effective immediately. Boots. The temperature in the lounge dropped by what felt like 20 degrees. Gary Pruitt's mouth fell open. A full operational hold was not a delay. Boots. It was a system-wide grounding, the kind of order reserved for security threats and catastrophic technical failures. It would cost the airline millions of dollars within the hour, and every single person in that lounge, every flight crew, every gate agent at every terminal this airline operated would feel it by dinner time. Boots. Dr. Whitfield? Marcus's voice cracked through the speaker, loud enough now that Preston could hear it too, his face draining of color in real time. Boots. Solace Air Systems, Dr. Whitfield. Is this a security issue? A software failure? You could call it a failure, Amara said, her gaze still fixed on Preston. Boots. A failure in the human systems. I'll explain everything when you land. Second thing, pull the personnel file for the floor supervisor at Meridian Club Lounge, Ashford County. Badge number, Gary. Would you read it to him, please? Boots. Gary, hands shaking, unclipped his badge and read the number in a voice that had lost all its earlier authority. Boots. Third, Amara continued, I want legal to open a file on a passenger named Preston Calloway. Calloway. I'll send you his boarding pass photo in a moment. Boots. The lounge had gone so silent that the sound of Vanessa's suitcase wheel, shifting an inch on the carpet as she took an involuntary step backward, was audible from 10 feet away. Boots. Preston's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he found something to say. Wait. What? Solace Air Systems, that's the flight software company. That's not. You're not. Boots. I'm the founder, Amara said, ending the call and setting the phone in her lap. And CEO, my name is Dr. Boots. Amara Whitfield. I've been flying under my mother's maiden name for the past 6 years, whenever I want to see how my own airline treats the people who fly it. Boots. Today, apparently, was very informative. Nobody moved. The Navy veteran was the first to speak, a low, quiet, Lord have mercy under his breath that somehow carried across the entire room. Boots. Preston Calloway's face had gone the color of old paper. Vanessa's hand had drifted, unconsciously, to cover her own mouth. Boots. That's not possible, Preston stammered, grasping for footing that no longer existed beneath him. You were just sitting there reading a book. You don't even. Where's your ID? Prove it. Anyone could say that. Boots. You're welcome to call the front desk of Solace Air Systems in Charlotte and ask for my office directly, Amara said, standing now, smoothing her cardigan with the same unhurried calm she'd carried since the moment Preston had first loomed over her chair. Boots. The numbers on every safety card in every seat pocket on this airline's fleet. I wrote half the language on that card myself 6 years ago, after my own father was nearly bumped from a wheelchair-accessible seat by a gate agent, who assumed he wasn't disabled enough to need it. Boots. He was 71 then. He's 71 now. He's in hospice in Denver. That's where I was flying today before you decided my chair belonged to you. Boots. The mention of her father did something to the room that the corporate title hadn't. Vanessa's carefully composed disdain finally cracked into something like shame. Boots. Gary Pruitt's eyes were wet. Preston, however, did what men like Preston always do when the ground shifts beneath their certainty. He dug in harder. Boots. This is a setup, he said, his voice climbing toward panic now. You people always do this. You wait for someone to say the wrong thing, and then You're recording this, aren't you? This is entrapment. I want a lawyer. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just standing up for my family's rights as paying customers. Boots. You told me to get up, Amara said quietly, before you called security to embarrass me. Your wife said I didn't belong. Boots. You said I had nothing but a library card and an attitude. None of that required a setup, Mr. Calloway. Boots. You did all of that entirely on your own. 15 minutes later, 2 more men in navy blazers arrived. Not security, but airline corporate compliance officers who had been dispatched the moment Marcus flagged the incident up the chain. Boots. They asked Preston and Vanessa Calloway to step aside for a conversation. Preston tried one final time to invoke his platinum status, his monthly flights, his relationship with airline management. Boots. The compliance officer, a soft-spoken woman named Renata Ford, simply opened a tablet and read aloud, in a flat, unbothered voice, the full transcript of what 3 separate witnesses, Lindsay, Gary, and the veteran, whose name turned out to be Elias Boone, a retired Army Master Sergeant who had watched the entire exchange with a soldier's steady attention, had already given in written statements. Boots. Preston Calloway did not apologize. Not once, not to Amara, not to Lindsay, not to Gary. Boots. He spent the entire conversation with Renata Ford explaining, with escalating desperation, why none of it was actually his fault. The flight delay had stressed him out. The lounge was too crowded. Nobody had properly explained the seating policy. Amara should have simply identified herself sooner and avoided the whole misunderstanding. Boots. She shouldn't have had to identify herself at all, Elias Boone said quietly from across the room, arms still crossed, for you to treat her like a human being. Boots. Nobody had an answer for that. Not even Preston. The operational hold Amara had ordered lasted 6 hours and cost Solace Air Systems an estimated $4 million in delayed and rerouted flights across 3 states. Boots. It made the evening news in Charlotte, then Atlanta, then, by morning, national business press. Not because a CEO had grounded a fleet in a fit of pique, but because within hours, Solace Air Systems released a statement explaining exactly why. A documented, video-confirmed incident of a passenger being racially and verbally harassed by another customer, while airline staff failed, repeatedly, to intervene appropriately. Boots. The airline that operated the terminal, a separate company from Solace, which merely supplied its software, issued a public apology within 18 hours and announced a full, mandatory retraining program for every gate agent and lounge supervisor across its network, developed in direct partnership with Dr. Boots, Whitfield's team. Gary Pruitt, to his credit, was not fired. He was retrained, and 6 months later he would tell a reporter, unprompted, that the day had taught him more about his own blind spots than 20 years on the job had. Boots. Lindsay stayed on as well, promoted the following spring to lead trainer for the new de-escalation program, because when Renata Ford's investigation concluded, records showed Lindsay had been the one who quietly called her supervisor for help the moment the confrontation began, rather than escalating it herself. Boots. Preston Calloway was banned permanently from every property connected to the airline and from every Solace-affiliated partner airport lounge in the country, 22 locations in total. Boots. He and Vanessa were also asked, politely but firmly, to leave the Meridian Club lounge that same afternoon, before their own flight had even boarded, escorted out by the very security he'd threatened to summon against Amara less than an hour earlier. Boots. He did not go quietly. Even as compliance escorted him toward the exit, he was still talking, still explaining, still certain that somewhere, somehow, an apology was owed to him. Boots. 3 months later, Preston Calloway applied for a director-level sales position at a mid-sized logistics firm in Raleigh, a company that, unbeknownst to him, held a multi-year software contract with Solace Air Systems for fleet tracking integration. Boots. Standard background and reference checks for any position involving client-facing airline partnerships included a routine flag search across partner databases. Boots. His name returned a permanent do not serve designation, tied to a documented harassment incident filed under Solace Air Systems compliance records 6 months prior. Boots. The hiring manager, reviewing the flag with visible discomfort, rescinded the offer the same afternoon it had been extended. Boots. Preston would never fully understand why 3 more logistics and aviation-adjacent job offers quietly dried up over the following year, not lightning from the sky, just a line of data in a system, following him silently through doors he never even knew he was about to knock on. Boots. Vanessa Calloway, for her part, filed for divorce 5 months after the incident. In the filing, made public through routine county records, she cited, among other things, a pattern of public behavior that has caused irreparable damage to our family's reputation and my own sense of safety in social settings. Boots. She had, apparently, watched the video of her husband's unraveling circulate online nearly 4 million times, his voice forever preserved saying the words "people like you" to a woman who turned out to be worth roughly $800 million on paper. And something in her had finally, permanently, changed its mind about him. Boots. Amara Whitfield made it to Denver that night, 6 hours later than planned, on a private charter arranged by her own company. Boots. Her father, Walter Whitfield, was awake when she arrived, propped up on hospital pillows in a hospice room that smelled faintly of lavender and rubbing alcohol. Boots. She sat beside his bed and held his hand, the same hand, 40 years earlier, that had held hers in a different airport, a different decade, when a much younger Walter had been told, politely but firmly, that seats near the front of a very different kind of vehicle were reserved for other people. Boots. You didn't have to make a scene, he said to her, his voice thin but his eyes clear, after she told him what had happened. Boots. You could have just moved. I know, Amara said, but you never taught me to move. Walter Whitfield smiled, the first real smile the nurses had seen from him in 3 days, and closed his eyes, and for a long while neither of them said anything at all. Boots. The window was open a crack. Boots. Somewhere outside, a plane took off, its engine sound rising and then fading into the wide, dark Colorado sky, carrying people who would never know that the woman holding her father's hand in room 214 had, 6 hours earlier, made sure that plane, and every plane like it, was a little bit safer for the next person who simply wanted a seat by the window. Boots. 6 months after that afternoon in the Meridian Club Lounge, Solis Air Systems' internal culture survey recorded its highest customer dignity ratings in company history. Boots. A new policy, quietly implemented across every partner lounge in the network, now required any staff member witnessing a customer dispute involving discriminatory language to document and report it within the hour, with full protection against retaliation. Boots. Employees called it, informally, the Amara Rule. Nobody had to explain why. If this story stayed with you, not for the ending, but for the moment you recognized someone in it, hit like so it reaches the person who needs to hear it today. Boots. Share it with someone who's ever been told to get up out of a seat that was rightfully theirs. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in that lounge? And which side of the room were you standing on? Boots. I read every single answer.